Hey all, it's KR King of D&D Homebrew, talking today about letting your players do the talking. And by that, I mean more of the talking, not necessarily all, obviously, but more in terms of the way the game flows from you, the GM, the players responding. For me, this is one of these things as a GM, the tendency always is to talk too much. And this comes out of a couple things that, first of all, you're presenting the world, right? So whether you have a module or your own homebrewed thing, you're describing everything the players see. You're having all the NPCs respond to them. There's a natural unbalance there that arises where you just think, well, of course, I've got to be doing all this talking, and then they're listening to me talk. Well, you don't need to do as much talking as you think. And when you watch, if you look at, some online games that are streaming, the ones I found that are less interesting are often where the GM is doing all the talking. And there's just headshots of players staring off into space, listening to them describe things. The good ones let them ruminate on things, they ask questions, and there isn't some 10-minute elaborate answer, because another element is not just that you're taking up all the air, all the oxygen when you're doing all the talking in a D&D or RPG setting. It's that you're giving information often that is unearned. It's not a contest, but the players want to earn, right? They want to solve the puzzles themselves. They want to figure out what's happening between rival NPCs amongst themselves. They want to discuss this, and then they want to formulate a plan and act upon that plan. And even if it's a bad plan, even if it's the dumbest thing you've ever heard, if you let it out that that's the case and make it obvious, it's not as satisfying. And that's an extreme example. You're sitting there watching them and you're going, oh my God, they're doing this all wrong. They don't realize I didn't give enough clues. I need to give them something more. Well, that might be the case. But it could also just be that that's what they've decided. You've laid out these clues, and that's the assumption they're making. You're letting them formulate it on their own, and that's just the direction they're going. But in an everyday sense, when you watch people run and you watch GMs who talk too much, and again, I can be a prime, this is a part of the reason you are a GM is because you've got all these ideas about worlds and you want to run things, and it's not so boring. It can be boring to be a player when the GM talks too much, by the way, but it can be more boring as a player. If you've ever been on a movie set or anything, it's really boring unless you're the director, because you're working 100% of the time, right? But the actors just sit around. That's why they have the trailers for the big shots. The other actors just sit around. They're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And the technicians and everything, everybody's waiting, right, for things to happen. Well, you don't want to be the director GM who's, I'm just spinning my elaborate tales while everyone has to sit there and listen, right? And also when they're playing the game, you want them to do the talking. So I'll give you an example. On my Patreon, I did a thing on caves, cave entrances to be specific. Because nothing intrigues us as a player more when we come across and we see a cave. There it is. And I gave a whole bunch of different ideas and examples and talked about caves and the mythology of them and everything. But if you think about what that means to the players when they come along and you say, you see over, however far away, what looks to be a cave entrance, or they see, bats flying out. That's how Carlsbad Caverns was discovered in New Mexico. But anyway, the players immediately go, oh, there's a cave. And the GM's telling us about it. We're going to go look at that. And then when they go up there, you give a basic description, the terrain and the cave entrance and how big it is, and then just let them do things and let them talk. So they go up to the entrance, and the things that you should tell them at that point is something that isn't necessarily something that they're going to ask. So let's say it smells horrific as you get within 20 feet of the entrance of this cave. But you're not requiring them to ask you, what does it smell like? Because as they walked up, they'd be like, whoa, what is that? Okay, so that is something that you could tell. But in terms of is there anything written on the rocks, or are there any signs of that humans have constructed this cave? Let them ask. Don't just say it. It appears as though someone has, formed this cave, and up above are these petroglyphs, and they look like that's you talking. That's you filling the air, right? Let them investigate the cave entrance. What is it? Does it look natural? Right? Are there any signs of habitation outside as they gaze in? How far back can they see? Do they go up to the entrance and with torches or dark vision or whatever's in your world, look in there and ask you, what do I see? Right? What do I hear? Let them ask it. Now, again, if there are very loud noises in there, but in order to say, what do I hear? What do? Well, we all stop and we get silent. We listen. Do we hear anything? Well, you hear the dripping of water. Right? But that wouldn't necessarily be something unless they ask you. Because once the players get used to this style of play, once they realize, I'm not just going to sit back and the GM is just going to tell me everything that's happened, they have to ask you questions. They have to tell you not just what telling me what you're doing is great, but also they have to investigate. This is exploration. This is what explorers do. There isn't a disembodied voice telling the explorers what's going on, when they're looking into things. They're making a concerted, organized, methodical exploration of this place. And they will get used to this. And you can have standard operating, this is our group formation, and one person is doing, if you're like a Pathfinder, the search activity, and they're watching out for things, they're detecting magic, and all that kind of stuff. That's fine. But what you want to do is just let them ask you questions about what is happening in front of them. You're waiting for them to say, I look at the floor, and does it look like anyone's been there? Are there any tracks? Are there any signs of a fire? And they'll get used to that. And then what happens is you will see when you're letting them do this, because you'll see that they will become more active in their talking about what they're doing. Because the other thing that you can do is have a pregnant silence, as it were. This is an old interview techniques. I've interviewed people. I've made documentaries and different things. And when you're interviewing something, you ask them a question and then they answer, and then you just sit there. And they will fill in the space often with something that's very revealing or very interesting. It's not a gotcha thing. It's just the way you do interviews is you let them talk as long as you want. You don't move on to the next question. You let them ruminate. Let that dead air hang there, and they'll remember something. It really does work. It's hard to do. Part of the reason that you become a GM, I'm pretty confident, is you want to do a lot of the talking. You want to describe your world and all that. But again, that impulse to realize, oh my gosh, I'm doing 90% of the talking. That's not good. You got to do a certain percentage, but you can sit there and let those pregnant pauses happen. And if they look at you, you can say, okay, are you done? Is that it? Or whatever, that kind of thing. It's not more description of the thing. Is that, are you done investigating? Because they'll think to themselves, we better investigate a little more. We better check things out before we just walk into that cave. They'll walk into the cave, right? Because they're going to investigate it. But you're going to give them, and again, as they walk in, you describe the cave entrance. They describe to you what they're doing and whatever. And then when they see something, you describe it and you just shut up and let them say, I go towards the thing and I touch it, or I look at it closely, and you're just listening to what they're doing, right? You're not saying, as you get closer, you can if it's real obvious. And again, obviously with all these things, there's a subtlety to this. But I think the thing that gets us all in trouble as GMs when we overtalk is we lose the sense of discovery because the players are active, not passive. It's more compelling. And we lose the sense of wonder that they're looking at this, the fabled cave entrance that they start to realize is some kind of tomb or something. And we lose the possibility that the players will come up with a scenario or a story or whatever on their own that is either right on, close to on, they're connecting things, and that is incredibly satisfying when they remember, wait a minute, that hieroglyphic, I think that's like something that, was that similar to the one we discovered in the da-da? And then either, however your system is, you roll, or you just do it. Yes, it was. Oh, this is the same thing. But they asked. You don't go, you see a hieroglyphic, and it reminds you of one you've seen before. No, that's too much talking. That's too much information. Just tell them that and let them think, because the good players will remember that these things all have a tendency to be interconnected to each other. But the point is that they're coming up with these ideas. And the only way that they can come up with ideas is if they have time to talk. and space. Because you've got everything in your head or written in your notes or in the module or the adventure path. It's all right there. You don't have to do any thinking. We've all played with people that just, every time you play the module, it's clear. They just picked it up. They're looking at it. It's totally fine for them. They're just reading away, but we're all listening to this. What you want is for us to explore the world, and you just respond when it's necessary. When it's either really obvious, I don't need to ask, or when you're answering questions that the players have about things. Once they get used to this style, I'm telling you, they will respond. Yes, you have players that don't want to take part in that. I just want to fight battles. I get all that. Or they're on the spot when you say, what are you doing? What are you doing? That person gets very nervous. There are those players. But others will respond very positively to the idea that you are going to do maybe not as much talking as the GM, but that would be great if you can get it to. And again, not necessarily, we've also seen, or I have, some streaming channels or whatever, where the players are doing all the talking and it's all extraneous, vamping or, social interaction type stuff. Again, if that's your game, go for it, because they're talking. You still want them all to talk, not you. For you to sit there and vamp, that's beyond a cardinal sin, right? But the other element is when you see a campaign where the people are doing lots of talking and they're interacting with each other and they're trying to figure things out and they're talking about, we want to go and we want to think about how we're going to do this heist or this or that. And you're just sitting and you're only answering what either would be in front of them, if they're investigating. Like if they ask questions about some NPC that's not on the stage, if they don't know anything about it, don't give them a full history. You don't know. And let them ask who would know, right? Who would know about this person? You don't really know. Is there anybody you can think of? And they say, well, how about the bartender? Okay, you can ask him. That kind of thing. Not just the bartender tells you that this guy is, and that's our temptation, is to do that all the time because it moves things along. Because we don't want to be bogged down. Again, this is back to the, I've done this on my podcast with Daniel Norton. I am a say yes kind of GM. I'm not a say no. So if you ask people questions, they tend to tell you something because people can't resist it when they've got information. So that's where your NPCs can be talkative if the players go and ask them questions. And they learn to do this. They really do. They learn, hey, I'm going to have to take control of this. I'm not just listening to the GM spin this tale, and then every once in a while I roll dice or get in a battle or have to make a skill check or something. I'm actually driving the narrative, because the only way they can drive the narrative in a true sandbox is for them to do things and them to talk about what they are doing. So you're constantly saying to yourself, how can I talk less? And I guarantee you, if you can learn this, and believe me, I talk a lot, hence a channel. Not only do I GM, I have a YouTube channel where I can bloviate. So, it's not easy. But when you do it, and when the players are the ones that are actively creating that storyline or just discovering it themselves, it is very satisfying. And a shout out to my YouTube supporters this week. I did Floating Islands, which I love. More to come in my following one. Thank you guys for all your support. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for watching. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe. I'd love some comments on whether or not you agree or disagree on how much a GM should talk. But most importantly, my friends, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.